Hello and welcome to the Phyrexia All Will Be One limited set review preview thing that I'm doing this time to help me prepare for pre-release and also just as a general set review if you're interested in that type of thing. First things first, I'm going to be going over my tier system thing. My face cam's probably covering up the actual title or whatever. That's okay. It's basically this is how I intend to rate the cards in this video. In these series of videos, I'll have one of these little reminder sort of bits at the front of every one of them. I'm not going to read over all the words in this. That's like pretty boring. But if you want to just like pause and take a look at what's going on here, this is sort of what the cards are supposed to mean. Basically, tier 1 is good, tier 4 is bad. That's about it, so without further ado, I'm just going to get right into it here. We're starting off with white, of course, and the first card is Against All Odds. We're going in alphabetical order. This card is 3 and a white, and it's a sorcery. You can choose one or both, and you can basically bounce something. You can exile, or not bounce, it's flicker is the correct term. Exile target artifact or creature you control, return to the battlefield, and you can return target artifact or creature with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Actually, like the more I see this, I didn't actually know you could choose both when I originally did these ratings. So this probably isn't like actually tier 4, but the problem is there's like there's some good ETBs. There aren't like enough, I think. There's no like Phyrexian Rager in this set type of deal where you can like bounce something and draw. So like the bounce mode probably doesn't really matter, especially because it's sorcery speed. And you are like, you have to have something in your graveyard, and the thing that you're getting is only 4 mana. I guess it's only 3 mana or less. It makes it tough, right? It makes it tough for this to be really strong, in my opinion. And there's really no like self-mill in the entire set at all. So until proven otherwise, I'm going to say this card's pretty bad. It might actually be tier 3 instead of tier 4, but I'm out on this card to start out here. Next, Annex Sentry, completely the polar opposite. 2 and a white for a 1/4 Toxic 1. So Toxic 1, and when it enters the battlefield, you exile target artifact or creature an opponent controls with mana value 3 or less until it leaves the battlefield. So this is sort of like a, what do you call it? O-ring attached to on a stick, right? That's what this is. It's got restrictions on it, but who cares? Like, it does the thing. It also has Toxic 1. It blocks pretty well, although blocking with it is obviously dangerous because you're maybe giving them their thing back. Yeah, this thing just sort of does a lot of good stuff in the format. You definitely want to be having toxic counters. A 1/4 is actually a great place to have a toxic counter in terms of, like, you kind of are wasting the toxic if you put it on like a 3/2 or something. Like Toxic 1 on a 3/2 doesn't like do anything as much as it does on a 1/4. Now obviously this still doesn't like get attack ever really. It just doesn't ever attack into anything. The additional mode of hitting artifacts with this is great as well. So it's going all the way up to tier 1. That's these type of cards are always tier 1 cards unlimited, and that's where this belongs. Possible invention, 4 white for a flyer. When your opponent has 3 or more poison counters, it has double strike. So I do think that your opponent will have 3 or more poison counters a lot, because that's what the whole set is about, mostly, is doing this sort of, like, get your opponent to have poison counters. There's some proliferate. White actually doesn't have any of the proliferated stuff. That's mostly blue and black and makes a little bit of green with that. This thing, it's just a large, dumb flyer. It does a ton of damage when it attacks. It does absolutely nothing sometimes. So that the floor is extremely low, and the ceiling is, like, high, but it's not as high as like a really busted like rare thing. It's not like a Tyrant of Carriages by itself, right? Because it's not doing the Flame Tongue Kabu thing. I don't know. It just is very, very large and hard to use. There's also tons of removal. It's very good in this set, so I don't think this is going to do anything. Next, Basilica Shepherd, 3 white white for a 3/3 flyer. It makes 2 1/1 might tokens when it enters the battlefield. And so, yeah, it sort of is one of those things where it does so much when you cast it. It sort of reminds me of the Angelic Quartermaster from, I think that was Streets of New Capenna. I could be wrong about where that's from. Maybe that was Vow, actually. Maybe that was Crimson Vow, where it's like this 5-mana 3/3 flyer that gives 2 +1/+1 counters when it ETBs. It's just basically like sort of the same thing, but it makes 2 guys that also do Toxic that you can also use for other stuff. It just does a lot. It just really does a lot of things. It's a flying thing that can block. It blocks like okay on 5. It's not amazing, but sort of okay. Yeah, I don't know. That's sort of all. Next, Bladed Ambassador, 1 and a white for a 3/1. It enters the battlefield with an oil counter on it, and you can remove an oil counter from it, and then you can pay 1 or remove an oil counter from it, and it gets indestructible until end of turn. I put this in tier 1. Maybe that's a little too high. Maybe it should be a tier 2 card, but my view on this is that it's going to be really hard to deal with. Theoretically, there's a decent amount of removal that answers it in the set. There's some good white removal and some good black removal that deal with it, but like I think a lot of times you're happy to just use the oil counter and say, all right, I'll take your 2 for 1. Like even if you can't, like if you can proliferate and make a second oil counter, it's like, oh, that's just fantastic, right? But you probably can't a lot of the time, and that's just fine. It's just really like does a whole lot. It's just really difficult to deal with this thing. Next, Charge of the Mites. Doing white for an instant, you can either deal damage to a target creature or planeswalker equal to the number of creatures you have, or you can create 2 mites, which we talked about earlier. They're toxic 1, they can't block. So the mites not being able to block is very bad, but I mean this card just doesn't do enough. That's sort of my view on it. Both of these modes are bad and overcosted, so I kind of don't really want to play this card ever. It's got a lot of like weird teeth stuff going on, as most of the white cards do in this set. Next, Complete Devotion. 1 and a white for an instant. Target creature you control gets +2/+2 until end of turn. If that creature has Toxic, draw a card. I think this combat trick's really, really solid, because you're drawing a card. I would say you're probably drawing a card when you cast this like 70% of the time, right? If you're putting this in the right deck, like its ceiling is tier 2. Obviously, I think its like floor is tier 4. It's like unplayable if you are playing it without toxic things, but like, you should be playing. There should be enough things in the set with toxic that you just want to play this in most of your decks. And when you draw a card off of this, it's really absurd. So, yeah. Next. Crawling Chorus. Single white mana for a 1/1 with Toxic 1. When it dies, you make a Might token. Yeah, I'm pretty big on this card. I'm pretty big on a lot of the 1-drops in this set, you'll notice. I think that this one specifically does a lot of things. 1-drops with Toxic are really solid because you can play them on turn 1, and a lot of times your opponent doesn't have a 1-drop. Like if you're on the play and you play this on turn 1, you're pretty much just like almost guaranteed. Well, I guess not. That's not true because there are so many good 1-drops. But regardless, 1-drops with Toxic are good because if your opponent doesn't have a 1-drop to answer you, you get that first poison counter, which is the most important poison counter. The second most important poison counter is the third one, and the third most important poison counter is the 10th one. Right? That's kind of my power rankings of most important poison counters in the set. The first one is incredibly important because it allows you to proliferate and just sort of keep ticking up your opponent if you have those cards. The third one, of course, activates all your corrupted stuff. And yeah, this thing is just really difficult to deal with. It provides 2 bodies to like sacrifice things with and like do a bunch of other stuff. It's like, sort of like a Doom Traveler. It's a little worse than Doom Traveler. I don't know. It's like sort of similar to that kind of effect where it makes another guy when it dies. Next, Duelist of Deep Faith, 1 and a white for a 2/2 Toxic 1, and as long as it's your turn, it's got First Strike. This is the perfect like white 2-drop thing, right? Like it doesn't block ever, but who cares? It wears that combat trick I just talked about exceptionally well. It almost always gets it. Like another card where it's like you're gonna be able to attack on turn 3 when your opponent like probably doesn't have like a 2/3 for 2, right? That doesn't really happen very often. So you probably are gonna get to attack with this and give your opponent a poison counter. When you do that, you've got the first poison counter on it, and you're rolling, and that's all good. And so that's just what this does. It activates all your stuff, which is really nice. Next is Elish Norn, Mother of Machines, 4 and a white for a 4/7 vigilance. It has other text on it, like whatever, like the text is fine, like it does things. Like when stuff enters the battlefield, it triggers double for you and doesn't trigger for your opponents. Who cares? The rate is just, it's not quite just like good enough by itself. But yeah, I mean, your opponent pretty much just like has to kill this because they can't ever really block it especially well because it just attacks for 4 to turn, and it's kind of like, well, I'm going to block this 4/7. I don't know. Yeah, so like the other stuff, there's text on the card or whatever. The mythics and rares, a lot of them I'll just sort of skip through and be like and gloss over because they're sort of just like self-evident that they're tier 1 cards. Because I don't do like a bomb tier, so I don't really separate them because I don't think it really helps at all to be like, oh, this card is so much, because a lot of times you just know. So next, Eternal Wanderer, 4 white for a 5 mana or 4 white for a 5 loyalty planeswalker. No more than one creature can attack at each combat. It has so the +1 is you can exile up to one target artifact or creature, return that you use bounce, you can flicker something basically. At the end, it comes back on end step. The 0 is you create a 2/2 with double strike, so like okay, and then the -4 is you can basically sacrifice everything but one of each of your opponent's creatures. So this thing is just insane. It's just really good. It just does all this stuff. Basically, does take over. Like if your planeswalker is a 6 mana and it takes over the game, it's great. If it doesn't take over the game, it's kind of like but whatever. This thing is fantastic. Next, Flensing Raptor, 2 and a white for a 2/2 flying toxic 1. When it enters the battlefield, another target creature you control with toxic gets +1/+1 and gains flying. So there's kind of like, you're sort of seeing this like package develop, right? Where you have this 1-drop with toxic 1, 2-drop with toxic 1, 3-drop with toxic 1, and they all kind of like enable each other and all attack. I think that's really strong, right? I think that's a really strong thing to be doing in the format, and that's why I put all of these cards in tier 2, where they're sort of like, there's this like tier 2 synergy package, right? That is going to be very difficult for your opponents to deal with as it comes down so early and starts getting those poison counters up to make your corrupted stuff turn on. Yeah, and that's great. This thing is just a menace, right? It's just an absolute menace. Like, say goodbye to Windrake or whatever. This thing is just nuts. Next, something that is not nuts. Gold Warden's Helm, 2 and white for an equipment. It has 4 mirrored in on it, which means that when it enters the battlefield, you get a 2/2 and attach this equipment to it. The equipment gives +0/+1. So all that for your mana here, and you can equip for 1 and a white. So first of all, the equipment is bad, and the thing that it makes is bad. So there's just nothing about this card that is good at all. There's no redeeming qualities to this card, and so I will be moving on. Next, Hexgold Hoverwings, 3 and a white for an equipment. It also has 4 mirrored in, so it makes it 2/2. In this case, the equipped creature has flying, and the creatures you control that are equipped get +1/+0. So this does boost your other equipment. Not that you want to be playing any of that, because spoiler alert, all of the equipment is mostly bad. So like, I mean, maybe it's actually good, but my opinion is that it's bad for now, until proven otherwise. This equipment is not even especially great. It basically makes it 3/2. It's a 4 mana 3/2 flyer. Yeah, I don't know. The equipment has static text, so like if it does get unequipped, your stuff still has +1/+0, but I don't care about that. It's getting a bump to tier 3 because it's slightly less unplayable than the other thing, but no, it's still not very good. Still not a high priority for me. It's one of those cards that I'll probably like not ever have in my deck because somebody else will think it's better than I think it is. So next, Incisor Glider, 1 and a white for a 1/3 flying. When it attacks, if it has corrupted, so whenever it attacks, if an opponent has 3 or more poison counters, creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. I've put this in tier 3 because it's in this weird spot, right? Where your opponent has 3 poison counters already, and you're kind of like not doing the poison counter thing with this. It's just like, this just does damage. And damage is still good, But it sort of has this, it's in this weird spot where I'm kind of like, does this overlap matter? Or are you sort of like, oh, like, are you killing your opponent in two ways when you really want to be killing them in one way? I don't know. The base rate on this is fine. I'm concerned that it does nothing too often for it to be truly incredible. It could be, this could end up in the tier 2, like, white aggressive package thing. Like, it does sort of play well with those other cards we talked about, but it also, I think those other cards are sort of just doing the, like, they don't need this. They sort of just poison your opponent and then kill them, right? So that's my my view on this thing. Next, Indoctrination Attendant, 3 and a white for a 3/4 toxic 1. When it enters the battlefield, you may return another permanent you control to its owner's hand if you do create a 1/1 might token. This doesn't fit into what white's doing for me. It yeah, it mostly just doesn't. It's fine or whatever. Like, it's sort of annoying to block, and you could be doing the control thing. I guess if you're doing the, like, control-y thing, which I don't think white is trying to do at all. This sort of does that, but I don't think you want to be doing that. It just there's nothing that you want to return to your hand. Basically, is sort of what's going on here. So this is mostly just a 3/4 toxic 1, and then, like, sometimes you get value out of that other text. So next, more bad equipment. Flesh Cutter, Infested Flesh Cutter, 1 and a white for a equipment. Does not have Formiridan. I think this is, I believe, no, this is not the only equipment in the set, but it is one of the very few equipment in the set that do not have the Formiridan text on it. Equipped creature gets +2/+0. Whenever a equipped creature attacks, create a 1/1 Phyrexian Might creature token. I'm sure there are some situations where you have cards that synergize with this, and then it's equipped for 2 and a white. So you have to equip for 3. So you're paying 5 mana to get this thing online that your opponent just goes, all right, minus, like it's just, I hate this. This is just so bad. I don't, like, what are, like, your opponent has so much time to answer this, and when you even if you get it to do the thing, it only makes a 1/1. Like, I don't know. The art is great, so Mission to, like, let's talk about that. This is, like, top tier art. This art is incredible. Moving on. Jawbone Duelist, 1 and a white for a double strike, toxic 1/1, 2 mana. Yeah, great. Fits well with all the other stuff I was talking about earlier. That sort of aggressive toxic package. That this fits right in. Wears that combat trick exceptionally well. I'm telling you, so that's why that white combat trick's so good, right? Like, you just have all these creatures that just incidentally have toxic 1, and it's just like, oh, so my card is just drawing me a card like 70% of the time. So that's really what's going on here. Next, Kemba, 1 and a white for a legendary cat. It's a 2/2. When it or a cat enters the battlefield under your control, attach up to 1 target equipment you control to that creature. And equipped creatures you control get +1/+1. He's trying to make you do the equipment thing. I think that the equipment thing is generically bad, and so this card will suffer as a result of that. But yes, if you are playing a bunch of bad equipment, it makes those bad equipment much better. It makes them very, very good, in fact. And then when it dies, it does nothing, and then your equipment is back to being bad again. And there's a lot of ways to kill stuff. So what this mostly reads to me is, okay, I have a 2-mana 2/2, and then I start making 2/2s for 5 later on, and that's fine. And it's like fine or whatever. It's not anything especially fantastic, but it does synergize with some things. And there are some good pieces of equipment in the set, so they're mostly rare. But there's also this weird toxic one that I'm not sure about whether or not it's good, but yeah, we'll figure that out later. Next, Leonin Lightbringer, 2 and a white for a 3/2 cat rebel. It's got word 2, and as long as it's equipped, it gets +1/+1. No, thank you. First of all, it doesn't say toxic on it, which I think is bad in white. I think white wants all of its creatures to say toxic on them somewhere. The equipment stuff is just bad. Maybe I should even put this in tier 4. The thing is that it does, like, I'm always tempted by it. I'm like, oh, word 2, but, like, does your opponent ever want to interact with this? No, they don't. They don't care about this thing. It's just a 3/2. Maybe you equip it. Okay, whatever. This thing, this is actually the perfect card. If you're doing, like, the colorless equipment toxic thing, this is where this is the only place I can see this card fitting in, is where you have that toxic 1 equipment. This would be great with that, but otherwise it's bad. So I'm not interested. Next, Mandible Justicar. 1 and a white for a 2/1 life link. Whenever another artifact enters the battlefield under your control, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Yeah, no, lifelink is good and limited, so we'll just be, like, we put the, like, I don't care that this card doesn't have Toxic on it. That's how good lifelink is, right? I'm very out on cards that don't have Toxic on them, and yet this one is still rated extremely highly for me because it has lifelink. And there's like, what, like, 2 mana 2/2 lifelink is just a good card in limited, right? We know this. And so this is going to be a good card in limited. Next, Mirren Bardish. Don't know how to pronounce that word. 4 and a white for a equipment. It does have 4 Mirrodin, so at least it makes a 2/2. So basically, the equipped creature has +2/+1 and has Vigilance equipped for 3 and a white. So, I don't know, man. Like, what is exciting about this? That it loses to bounce spells? Like, is that what's exciting about it? I don't know. It's so expensive. Like, you're paying 5 mana for a 4/3 Vigilance. Like, what? Like, what? This is, like, I don't understand why it's so bad, right? Like, why does it have to be bad instead of, like, playable? I don't know. Whatever. Next, on Mondrak. Glory Dominus. He's dominating, baby. 2 white for a 4/4 Phyrexian Horror. If one or more tokens would be created under your control, create twice that many tokens instead. You can pay 1 and 2 Phyrexian mana and sacrifice 2 other artifacts or creatures, and you can put an indestructible counter on it. Yeah, this thing's incredible. It's really, really good. It actually makes fuel for itself to keep it indestructible, which is really nice. It works well with all the might stuff that white's doing. So yeah, I mean, it's just really, really good. It's solid. Like, you're never gonna not play it in your decks. I don't think it's gonna be like Omega busted or whatever, but it's gonna be up there. Next, Norn's Wellspring. 1 and a white for an artifact. Whenever a creature you control dies, you scry 1 and put an oil counter on this card. And if you pay 1 and tap it and you remove 2 oil counters from it, you can draw 1. So this card's interesting, right? Like, I'm enticed by this card. There is power in this card. This card can be powerful. My question, it does not fit what white's doing broadly at all. White is an aggressive color. White's attacking you with these toxic things. This doesn't do that. But it is it has an exceptionally strong interaction with certain other cards in the set, where if you were to get an oil counter on this and then start proliferating, you can now turn your proliferate into, like, actual card draw, like, sort of like half of a card draw. So, like, eventually you may or may not be able to do the thing. So I think this can work in some decks. I do think that white more broadly is not looking for this, but if you're playing like a Esper control thing or a blue-white control thing, which there isn't a ton of support for, but you can do it, like, this would be a reason to do that, and you could probably do the thing that it's trying to get you to do. So I put it in tier 3, even though, like, I think it's more often than not going to not be what you want to be doing. Next, Orthodoxy Enforcer, 3 and a white for a 2/4 Vigilance. Yeah, look at that. It's got Metalcraft for 2 or more artifacts. It gets +2/+0 as long as you control 2 or more artifacts. So, yes, it does have Metalcraft for those of you that are Magic the Gathering boomers like myself, although I'm not really, like, we're not going to get into my Magic the Gathering history here, but yeah. Anyways, this card basically is like, if this were just a 4 mana 4/4 Vigilance, how good would it be? I don't know. Like tier 3. Like, I still don't even think this would be a tier 2 card. I think it would be just like an average card if it was a 4 mana 4/4 Vigilance. It would be like fine. It'd be like, oh, okay, that's like whatever. Like, it's okay. It's not winning the game or anything. So I don't know. If it scaled and got like +2/+0 for each 2 artifacts you have, I'd be like, ooh, I'm interested, but I'm not that interested. I'm seated. Next, one of those removal spells I was talking about, Ossification, 1 and a white. So it's an aura And you enchant a basic land you control for reasons. When it enters the battlefield, exile target creature or planeswalker and opponent controls until it leaves the battlefield. Yeah, this thing's just really fantastic. I don't really have like any other things to say about it. Like you mostly want to be. It doesn't hit artifacts, so that's the one thing that this misses on. And there is a decent amount of artifacts in the set, but this is one of the better white removal spells that we've seen. Like this is just really, really efficient. It's hard to be this efficient, and it enchants an aura. So I assume that's for like other like that's just for synergy purposes. Like the way I really like that actually. I'm actually a huge fan of the way this card's templated, because I think this is like a really cool design. Because it allows you to have like that aura synergy stuff going on, but also have like removal in that shell that usually didn't have any removal at all. And it also had like it works with basic lands. I don't know. I just like all the things about this card. I think this card's very cool and unique, and I like it a lot. So, yeah, that's my stance on it. And next we have the Vindicator. 4 white mana for a 5/5 flying. And if damage would be dealt to Phyrexia Vindicator, prevent that damage. When this damage is prevented, it deals that much damage to any target. So it's just, yeah, I think it's really good. Now again, with this and also the Phyrexia Obliterator, which we know is coming up in the black section of this card review, you have to be able to cast them. Now even if you can only cast them on like turn 5. If this was 5 mana, it'd be incredible. If this was 6 mana, it'd be incredible, right? Like that's fine. So if you get to like 13 white sources, you're probably okay. You're going to be happy with this in your deck. You're going to want it. But you do need to get there. It is a build around. It's not easy to cast. So keep that in mind. But yeah, this thing when it hits the battlefield is like is real good. It's real good. Now it's not even like a take over the game, whatever, but it's real good when you slam it on turn 4, which you can build a deck to do. Next, Planar Disruption, 1 and a white. The enchantment. You enchant artifact, creature, or planeswalker, and the permanent can't attack or block, and its activabilities can't be activated. So this actually hits all the stuff that you really want in the set. Notably, it does not hit enchantments, and so it cannot like do the thing where you enchant this and then you get yours back. Like you enchant your opponents and then you get your planar disruption back, and then they get there's like this chain that can always happen with these, but this is not able to do that. So be advised. Advisory inbound. Neither of the white auras can have that happen actually in this set, which is interesting. It's an interesting note. So yeah, I mean this is just very efficient. It's not. I don't think it's quite as good as the other one. Mostly because it leaves the thing on the battlefield, which is something you don't really want. And you can like sacrifice. And again, mostly this is targeting creatures, although there are some planeswalkers and there are some artifacts that you want to remove. This thing's just very efficient. It does the stuff. Okay, that's all. Next, Plated Onslaught. 3 white, affinity for artifacts, instant. Creatures you control go to +2/+1 until end of turn. Yeah, I mean, I think this has its spots. Like, if you're doing the white aggressive thing, and you're making a bunch of might tokens that are artifacts, you're happy, right? You're playing this card, and you're like, yeah, I'll play like a 3 mana heroic. Like this is 3 mana a lot. Like, when you want to cast this card, and you want to cast this card in the late game, it's 3 mana a lot, and that's really strong. Like, that's a really strong effect, right? It kills people out of nowhere. So, yeah. Obviously, you don't always want it, so that's why it's in Tier 3 and not in like Tier 1 or Tier 2. It's not a card that is universally applicable, but when you have a critical mass of stuff, you want to play it. Next, Porcelain Zealot, 3 and a white for 2/3. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control gets +1/+1 until end of turn. If that creature has Toxic, instead it gets +2/+2. So actually, I think I would put this in Tier 3 if I were revising things, just like looking at how many Toxics there are. But when I first saw the card, I put it in Tier 4 as like a natural thing. That was just kind of my natural viewpoint. I was like, it sucks. And it does, like, this type of card is generally very bad, right? It's 4 mana, 2/3. So you're giving up a lot there, right? You're giving up a lot of stats. And so you get like one of those back, but only when you attack. And sometimes you gotta block. Like, this doesn't block ever. It never blocks. Can't do anything on blocks. So I don't think it's good, but like I think you could move it up to tier 3 because there is such a critical mass of toxic things, and the toxic stuff does want to get through, and there is like sort of like this help you do that. But generically, it's kind of this type of card is not very good, and I'm viewing it like it's not very good here. If you have the synergy for it, I'm sure it can be fine, but I'm not like prioritizing this very highly. I'd rather, honestly, I genuinely would rather play the like 3-mana flyer guy than this. Like this thing is like so much worse than that guy in like every way possible, but that's okay. Next, Resistance Reunited, 1 and a white for a instant. Target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Equipped creatures you control get indestructible until end of turn. Because I'm pretty sure that the equipment is terrible, I think this combat trick is terrible and worse than the common one, for the most part. So I don't really have anything else to say on it. I think this is just really, really bad and not something you ever want, no matter, like literally like never want, ever. But yeah, that's all I got to say. Equipment is bad. Next, Sinew Dancer, 1 mana for a 1/1. You can pay 3 and a white to tap target creature, or you can just pay a single white to tap target creature if your opponent has 3 or more poison counters, which I think is... So like the thing I like about this card, A, 1-drop. 1-drop is nice. B, it sort of enables itself, right? You're enabling your own ability to be cheaper. Like you could play this on 1, and you don't really want to play it on 1 though, because you want to play your like other like toxic 1-drop on 1. But like then you like if say you don't have that, so you play like you play a toxic 2-drop instead. And you hit to connect, and then you connect again. And then your opponent plays something that can block. You can just spend turn 4 being like, all right, tap down your thing, attack, get you to 3 poison counters, and then this is 1 mana for the rest of the game, which I think is really, really strong. And I think it's just is extremely annoying, so I think I'm going to start it pretty high here. Next, Skrillov, Defector Might. It's a single white mana for a 1/1 with Toxic 1. It can't block. You can pay 1 Phyrexian mana and tap it, and it has this like long line of text that essentially is like the Mother of Runes text, where our target creature gets Toxic 1 and Hexproof from a color, and it can't be blocked. So it basically gains protection, but it can't block. Like it doesn't do the protection where it blocks thing. I don't know. It's weird. I don't know why they didn't just give it protection. It is weird. I don't know. At least they weren't. At least Wizards of the Coast were not cowards and did, in some capacity, bring back Phyrexian mana. It would have been cowardice for them not to bring it back. That would have been, cowardice. That would have been. I would have not respected it, but they did something respectable. So that's nice. Yeah, this card's really good. It does all the stuff. It does all the stuff that white wants to do. I think this might be one of the better rares, to be honest with you, because it just enables all of your things. Next, Skrilliv's Hive. 1 and a white for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life and create a 1/1 Might token. And as long as your opponent has 3 or more poison counters, creatures you control with Toxic have lifelink, which is like all of your creatures, because like you just want to be playing all these good Toxic creatures anyways. Gives a lot of your stuff lifelink, and gives all the stuff it makes lifelink, and the stuff it makes helps enable it. I don't know, this thing just seems insane. It seems like it takes over the game so fast. It makes so many game objects. Yes, it just like it does all the things, and I like that, and it's really good. So that's my take on this card. Next, Swooping Lookout. 1 white mana for a 1/2 Flying Vigilance. Honestly, the best thing about this card is that it blocks all the other 1-drops. So I don't know. That's like its role in the format. For some reason, it's uncommon. Like this card wants to have equipment attached to it, is like what it's supposed to do. But the problem is all the equipment sucks, so you're never going to play any of the equipment, and so this is never going to have anything to attach to it. And then it's just going to sit there, and it's going to do nothing because it doesn't give your opponent poison counters. So you're kind of just like, all right, well, all my corrupted stuff's not getting turned on by this thing. It's kind of just blocking. But in a format where I think that 1-drops are going to be so important, it may be elevated in its importance because of how important 1-drops are in this format. And I think 1-drops in this format are very important. Similarly to Brothers War, where 1-drops are extremely important. I think this set, 1-drops being Sentinel Stalwart specifically, but in this set I think 1-drops are actually going to be even more important because there's a critical mass of like good ones. This may be elevated by the fact that the other 1-drops are so good. Yeah, that's my take on this card. Next, Vanish into Eternity, 2 white and 2 and a white for an instant. It costs 3 less or costs 3 more if you're targeting a creature, and you exile target non-land permanent. So, pretty simple, expensive removal. It is flexible. It does hit permanents. That's nice. That's why it's not tier 4. It's in tier 3. The expensiveness of it is what makes it not as good as the other ones. But yes, it does hit all of the things instead of just the creatures and planeswalkers. So, really, the only added utility here is the enchantments, of which there are not like tons or whatever. So, yep, it's fine, solid. Next, Veil of Assimilation, 1 and a white for an artifact. When it or another artifact enters the battlefield under your control, target creature you control gets +1/+1 and gains vigilance until end of turn. No, thank you. Why couldn't this just like put an oil counter on something and give it plus? Like, was that too good? I don't know. I know white doesn't do oil counter stuff really, but like, I don't know. This thing just never. This is just like Thran Vigil. Like maybe it's even worse than Thran Vigil. I said it's slightly better than Thran Vigil, but like maybe it's worse. I don't know. It's like 2 mana do nothing mostly. I'm not interested in this. Like this doesn't enable your stuff. Like there's better ways to enable your things to attack than just give them +1/+1 until end of turn, and only when like it's artifact stuff. There are a decent number of artifacts, but I just don't think. Like this would obviously be too good if it buffed all your stuff permanently. I think, but when it only buffs it temporarily, it's too bad. So it's kind of just a tough situation. Next, White Sun's Twilight. X white white for a sorcery. You gain X life. You create X 1/1 colorless might artifact creature tokens. And if X is 5 or more, you destroy all the other creatures. So, yeah, this is just really, really strong. Because you just get to have all of the stuff die, and then you make a bunch of 1/1s. Now, you don't get to choose, so that's notable. You can't pay X. You can't pay X is equal to, like, 8, and then be like, but I don't want to destroy anything. But, like, yeah, who cares? Like, it's so good. You never don't cast this for 7, though. This is one of those cards where you're like, well, I'm never not casting it for 7, because it basically doesn't do anything if you don't cast it for 7. But yeah, so you always cast it for 7, but when you do it, like wins. So I think it's pretty strong. Next, and this is the final card in white, it's Zealot's Conviction. Single white mana for enchantment. It has flash, enchanting, and it's a creature enchantment. It's an aura. Enchanting creature gets +1/+1, and as long as an opponent has 3 or more poison counters, the enchanting creature gets an additional +1/+1 and has first strike, and that's permanent. So we just saw a card like this, Military Discipline, in Brothers War. I think this actually is better than that card in a lot of scenarios. In some scenarios, obviously, it's worse, but in a lot of scenarios, it's better. Sometimes it's a strict upgrade, but a lot of times it's going to be tough. But yeah, I don't know, man. It was really, really good. I don't see a reason to believe that this won't be good again, and this is another great combat trick. So you've got this kind of white package of aggressive stuff, and I think this fits right in. And that's going to do it for the first part of the set review here. Hope this was enlightening in some way. I hope it was helpful. Hopefully it has made me a better evaluator of cards. But, yeah, that's about it. Thanks for watching. See you.